Horror, raft, and the deep forest. Due to all the events that occurred, I need to take everyone back to around 2016. At that time, the company where Tony worked had much better business performance. The company's boss wanted to reward the employees by organizing a recreational trip, and that trip was whitewater rafting. They would spend a total of 2 days and 1 night, with the company covering all expenses. Tony said that his company had only about 10 to 20 employees, but everyone thought this trip would be full of excitement. Before the entire trip began on Sunday morning, which included stopping to make merit at a temple and having fun group activities throughout the journey, everyone arrived at the resort's dining room late in the morning. While everyone was eating together according to the schedule, a handsome young man with refined mannerisms walked in and sat at a nearby table. He introduced himself as Lay and said he was a businessman staying alone for vacation. Lay seemed quiet but friendly. When he heard that Tony's group was going rafting, he warned them with concern, "Please be careful, there are some strange things in the forest around here. But if you encounter anything that seems unusual, absolutely don't get involved with it." His words sounded serious, but everyone thought he was just joking. After finishing the activities, time had passed into the 1 p.m. period. Everyone came out to board the vehicle to prepare for the trip to the rafting point. They were told to leave their luggage in the dining room first and not to go to their rooms yet because they needed to hurry to catch the raft on time. However, while everyone was preparing to board the vehicle, the resort manager came in to warn them that they shouldn't go now because they might not make it back before dark, and the route was quite dangerous. Nevertheless, the boss who had been there before was confident they would return on time and insisted on taking everyone on the trip. At that time, everyone in the company just learned that the vehicle that came to pick them up wasn't the usual pickup truck used for tourists, but a truck that locals used to transport cattle. The reason was that the pickup truck couldn't accommodate everyone, but no one complained at the time because they were too excited about the surrounding atmosphere. Soon, a small party broke out on the back of the truck when alcoholic beverages were opened, and they ate, drank, sang, and danced together joyfully. Strangely, during the journey, there was a motorcycle following their truck from the distance, but no one noticed. When the alcoholic drinks began to take effect and the music got louder, the motorcycle's headlight flashed as a warning signal, as if someone was watching over them. Even though they had been riding for more than half an hour, everyone was still cheering throughout the journey, not caring that the truck had taken them through dirt roads surrounded by forest on both sides for the entire route. After spending about 1 hour on the vehicle, Tony's group arrived at their destination, where he later learned that the distance from the resort to the rafting point was nearly 20 kilometers apart. Moreover, this trip wasn't an ordinary tourist trip, because the boss had coordinated with the local village headman to arrange a special private raft. The village headman therefore arranged rafts with 2 professional raft guides to take them rafting down the river. For the women, Tony called both raft guides Brother Lamb because their physiques were quite strong and muscular. The men would raft on their own, according to their abilities. The atmosphere on the raft was filled with laughter before there was swimming and celebratory drinking for relaxation amid the quiet and abundant nature. Moreover, that day there were no other tourist groups' rafts to be seen at all. Everyone rafted along the quiet middle of the river until they encountered a small community located by the riverside. This community looked warm, with children playing in the water joyfully and villagers washing clothes along the banks. But while they were enjoying the activities, suddenly lightning flashed in the sky once without any rain clouds, and there was sad music coming from somewhere unknown. The villagers who saw this phenomenon recommended that the tourist group hurry to continue their journey. While Tony's group was enjoying the activities in front of them, Brother Lamb, who was one of the raft guides, stood up and announced that they needed to manage their time a bit because the distance was quite far, otherwise it would get dark first and be dangerous. This made many people begin to feel the time constraints of this activity. Tony said that normally the women's raft with Brother Lamb as the raft guide would float very fast and have to stop and wait for the men's raft, which was too busy playing in the water to watch the time. When the women's raft slowly floated away, the raft Tony was sitting on would be the last raft to float out from the rest point. At that time, Tony was sitting at the front of the raft. His younger brother was sitting in the middle of the raft, and Mike, another colleague, was sitting at the very back. But while they were about to continue their journey, an old woman from the Riverside community walked over to talk to Mike and said seriously, "This is in the middle of the forest, in the mountains. Don't go talking to anything random, child. And if you meet a strange little girl, absolutely don't respond to anything she asks." Tony, who heard this, didn't think much of it because he thought the old woman was probably speaking with good intentions according to the nature of elderly people who grew up with nature. Tony's raft floated without any timepiece because all the mobile phones were left with the women's raft to prevent them from falling into the water and being lost since the men planned to get thoroughly drunk. At first, they were still having fun, but as time passed, the food supplies ran out. Fatigue began to replace the fun. The color of the sky began to change rapidly. The golden light of the afternoon became the dullness that crept in to replace it. And since rafting out from the Riverside community, Tony's group hadn't encountered any of their friends' rafts, not even one. At that time, Tony began to roughly estimate the time in his mind that they had left the resort since around 1 p.m., and probably reached the point where they started rafting since 2 p.m. But now, looking at the light conditions, the time was probably around 5 p.m. or so. The last light of the day was beginning to disappear bit by bit until the raft of the three people floated to another Riverside community. But the atmosphere was completely different from the previous community because the houses in that area looked dilapidated, as if it were a community that had been abandoned for a long time. While they were rafting past that abandoned community, Mike said softly that he glimpsed a little girl in one of the houses. That child was standing, waving at me and pointing toward the forest, as if telling me to follow. When he heard this, Tony immediately interjected, "Mike, don't talk like this, don't joke like this, I'm not having fun at all. This isn't the time to talk like this, and absolutely don't pay attention to that child." Then, while the raft of the three people was moving along the stream, an unexpected incident suddenly occurred when the raft floated and got stuck on a rock in the middle of the stream, and no matter how they used poles to push, it wouldn't come loose. At the same time, the sad music sounded again near them, but this time it was sadder and clearer than before. Tony's group decided to get into the water, hoping to help push and lift the raft together. But as soon as he got in, he realized the water was deeper than he thought. What was worse was that the raft broke free from the rock and floated to hit Tony's body hard. Although his body wasn't injured at the time, his glasses fell off and sank into the water. This made his anger surge to its peak, until Tony had to explode emotionally by using his hands to pound the water hard, with the thought in his mind that this trip we should have been able to rest, not come to be exhausted like being punished like this. At that time, Mike and his younger brother came to comfort Tony. When he regained his composure, Tony told everyone that now the raft had floated away, let's hurry to pull the raft back first. The time then was probably around 6:30 p.m., which was the time when the last light of the day had almost completely disappeared. When they successfully got back on the raft, they let the current carry them along without knowing the direction. Until they had been floating along the water for a while, the voice of a male colleague called out Tony's and Mike's names. But the calling voice sounded strange, both sad and distant, as if coming from very far away. The three people shouted back joyfully, but then the calling voice went silent. This made all three people indescribably happy, but they also began to feel puzzled. Not long after, they met with 8 other colleagues, divided into 6 men and 2 women, and their rafts were parked waiting at a curved point that seemed impossible to paddle further. Moreover, the sky was almost completely dark by then. Additionally, there were dangers from rocks underwater, and what was much worse was that no one had a mobile phone because all the devices were left with the women's raft. There was only one iPhone that could play music, and the battery was only 30% at that time. After assessing the situation together, everyone decided to abandon the rafts and climb up the bank, hoping to walk through the forest back out. In this group, the boss would travel with them, but at that time he had lost his shoes, so he had to use his own shirt to wrap one foot, while Mike took his own headband to help wrap the other foot for the boss, before everyone began to walk through the pitch darkness within the forest without anyone knowing the exact path that would lead them out to emerge anywhere. While they were walking, another set of footsteps sounded closely behind them, but when they turned back to look, they saw no one. What was stranger was that sometimes there was flashlight light shining from behind, as if someone was following and watching over them. Tony said that the path they walked at that time wasn't a smooth walkway like what we see in movies, but was overgrown forest that was difficult to walk through. The darkness that obscured vision made everyone able to see each other within a distance of no more than 2 meters ahead. Fortunately, that night there was moonlight to help illuminate the way a little bit, although it looked dim, but it was the only hope left. Everyone slowly walked through the darkness within the forest, slowly, with Tom leading the way. He used the only mobile phone in the group to use as a flashlight to guide everyone because it couldn't be used for anything more than that, since the area had no communication signal. At the same time, each colleague took turns encouraging each other periodically with words like, "It's okay, we'll get there soon, just bear with it a little more." While they were walking, the sad music sounded again, but this time it came with the sound of children laughing that was spine-chilling to hear. Mike, who was walking at the back, whispered to Tony, "That little girl is following us. I can see her shadow behind us." At that time, Tony, who was walking second from the back, turned back to Mike, who was walking behind, saying with a forced smile, "Mike, we'll get there soon. When we reach the resort, we'll drink heavily together." But instead of getting a funny response back like every time, Mike refused to say anything at all until Tony had to turn back to look at his friend's face. What he saw was Mike's face that looked like someone holding back tears before Mike walked closer to him and hugged his arm tightly. This was the same moment when Tony's ears heard mysterious footsteps walking behind them. This made them both look at each other without saying a word, as if asking each other in their minds whether they heard the same thing. While Tony and Mike were feeling suspicious about the sounds they heard behind them, one of the women in the group walking ahead screamed in shock. Tony, who was in a bad mental state, fell to the ground. When he looked up to see the point where his friend screamed, he saw that the light from Tom's mobile phone shone on the figure of an old man standing there, before the old man asked in a calm voice, "Are you lost in the forest?" Tom asked back, "Uncle, are you from around here?"
The old man nodded slightly before answering briefly, "Yes, Uncle's house is around here. Come on, Uncle will take you out myself." The friends came to help support Tony to get up, then walked following the old man without anyone hesitating. However, when Tony's group began to continue walking, he noticed something that contradicted reality severely. Because at that time, they were walking in a pitch-dark forest, but the old man could walk and lead them without needing to use a flashlight. Although at that time, Tom would use his mobile phone to shine a flashlight behind them a little, the old man could walk ahead smoothly. Tony, who had often heard ghost stories, began to feel strange and prayed alone that let it not be what he was thinking. Let it not be. But while they were walking, there was the sound of a motorcycle engine from behind, and the headlight shone toward them. Everyone turned back to look and saw a young man riding a motorcycle coming in. It was the same person seen at the resort, Law. He stopped the bike and got off to walk toward the group while holding a large flashlight. "Is everyone safe?" Law asked with concern. "I followed to look for you when I saw lights in the forest." The old man who was leading stopped still and turned to look at Law with strange eyes. The atmosphere was silent and tense for a moment, before Law walked to stand between the tourist group and the old man. "Uncle, thank you for helping them, but now I'll take care of them myself," Law said, with a polite but firm tone. The old man stared at Law for quite a while, before nodding slightly and saying in a flat voice, "That's good then, take care of them." Then he turned his back and walked away into the darkness. Law turned to the group and said, "Everyone follow me, I know the way out." He led the way confidently, using the flashlight to light the path for everyone. The route Law took seemed much easier than the one the old man had led them on. Everyone continued to walk following Law, without anyone speaking or saying anything along the way, because everyone felt grateful that someone had come to help, but also wondered how he knew they were here. Until the path full of overgrown grass gradually changed to a smooth walkway that could be walked much more conveniently. After walking along the path for a while, everyone came to encounter a small wooden house raised about 1 meter from the ground. The house overall looked quite old and somewhat dilapidated. The moment Tony's group was about to walk past that house, a strong, rotten smell floated into their noses unexpectedly before Tony turned to look at Mike's face, who still showed a worried expression like someone about to cry. But before both could say anything, a sound like something hitting the wooden floor rang out loudly from inside that house, causing all members to run and huddle together in shock. Each person's face showed extreme panic. Law stopped still and turned to look at that house. His face changed noticeably, from a calm and cool demeanor to serious and alert. He stepped forward and raised his hand as a signal for everyone to stop. "Stay here first. Don't go anywhere," Law said. Softly, but everyone heard clearly. Then he walked closer to the house and began speaking in a strange voice that sounded like he was speaking in a language no one understood, but that tone had power and confidence. Not long after, the banging sound inside the house quieted down, the rotten smell also faded away. Law returned to the group and said, "You can continue walking now, but absolutely don't turn to look at that house." This made Tony's group hurry their steps to walk following Law quietly without anyone daring to ask anything further or even turn to look at that house even for a glance. After walking together for not long, suddenly there was flashlight light from another direction shining toward them. Law, who was leading, said, "Someone has come to pick you up." And when the second person holding the light walked closer to Tony's group, they learned it was the 2 brother Lams who had walked back to find them. Before one brother Lam said, "I thought everyone would have to get off the rafts, so I walked back to check first." Before he began to ask with curiosity, "How did they get here this way? This isn't a path that ordinary people would know." At that time, Tom, who still had the most composure, told Brother Lam that they had met a young man who helped guide them, and pointed toward Law. But when both Brother Lams turned to look in the direction he pointed, they saw no one at all. "Who? I don't see anyone here," one Brother Lam said confusedly. Everyone in the group turned to look in the direction where Law had been standing, but they no longer saw his figure. Law had disappeared without anyone noticing when he had gone. Tony felt chills and began to understand that Law might not be an ordinary person, but he felt grateful for what he had done for them. Both Brother Lams who had heard the strange story were silent for a moment, before Brother Lam said, "Oh, if that's the case, it must have been Uncle Kim for sure. He built his house inside here." But then he stopped talking and looked at each other with suspicion. But it's strange, Uncle Kim never helped people out of the forest. After standing and talking for a while, everyone walked following Brother Lam out from that point. Finally, they were able to successfully emerge onto the main road, which the point they emerged was about 200 meters away from the resort. When they walked to the resort, the women who had been waiting before brought food and water for them to drink and eat. That night, they returned to the resort at approximately 11 p.m.
When they arrived at the resort, the boss turned to invite both Brother Lams. "Don't go back yet, brothers. Come sit and eat with us first." But at that time, one Brother Lam asked to separate to go bathe because his house was not far from the resort, and he also promised to come back to sit and drink together again. This made some of Tony's group decide to separate to go bathe and recharge their energy. As for Tony, who was both hungry and tired, he chose to sit and eat first as the first priority. During the time Tony was sitting and eating, the other Brother Lam, who was sitting eating together at his table, said, "Since we've all made it out of the forest, I have something to tell you." The story that Brother Lam told was about Uncle Kim, the old man who they claimed had guided Tony's group out of the forest that night. Brother Lam said that Uncle Kim used to live with his family in a small community by the river, until one day, Uncle Kim's daughter, who was still a small child, went down to play in the water. But on that day, flash floods occurred, causing his daughter to disappear from that incident. Although there was continuous searching afterward, there was still no sign of finding Uncle Kim's daughter's body at all. That incident resulted in Uncle Kim's and his wife's lives being filled with sorrow, until one day, there was a foreign tourist
who needed to travel back from rafting at night, which was an incident similar to what Tony's group experienced. That tourist told them that the reason he was able to get out of the forest safely was because a little girl guided him out. Uncle Kim, who heard this story, was convinced that the little girl must be his daughter for sure. So he decided to move and build a small wooden house along the path where people said they had encountered the little girl, in case he could watch or one day meet his daughter again. Days and years passed for a long time. What Uncle Kim had hoped for didn't happen. His wife, who couldn't bear the sorrow, finally chose to end her own life by hanging herself in that house, the same house that Tony's group and friends had walked past. But what was more disheartening was that Uncle Kim continued to live alone and stayed in that house, refusing to go anywhere. Until last year, Uncle Kim died of old age and was found dead in the forest near that house. While Tony and the other brother Lamb were talking, other people who had just finished bathing gradually came to join the conversation, including the first brother Lamb who had asked to separate earlier. Brother Lamb walked back in with a restless manner. His face looked shocked, as if he had just faced something, before coming to announce to everyone, "Listen, don't be shocked when you hear this." Then he began to tell them that he had just moved back to live here after graduating. When he was bathing, he told his mother about Tony's group. When his mother heard this, she asked repeatedly, "Did you really meet Uncle Kim? Uncle Kim has been dead for a long time. Last year, they just found his body in the forest around there." What the other brother Lamb told made everyone sitting there completely silent. The atmosphere around the circle became uncomfortably tense in an indescribable way. The women who were grilling meat stopped their hands and hurried to sit together with Tony's group. But in the moment when everyone was stunned by what they heard, Mike spoke up with a slightly joking tone. "Boss, where is the headband I gave you to wrap your feet? I bought it expensively, sir." Before he learned from the boss that he had taken off those cloths at the streetlight by the road before reaching the resort, because he saw that the road around there was already smooth, so he didn't want to continue walking with cloths wrapped around his feet. Mike asked Tony to go back to get the cloth as a companion, but Tony firmly refused, even though he knew in his heart that that point was only 200 meters away. But after hearing all the spine-chilling stories, just the darkness outside was enough to stop the courage in him. At that time, Mike still insisted on going to get the cloth back. Tom, who didn't really believe in supernatural things much, volunteered to go look for the cloth together with Mike, before both of them went out from the dining area together. But then, not long after, Mike came running back alone, shaking and pale, and said tremblingly that he saw Uncle Kim standing under the streetlight with a small little girl. Tony, who saw that he spoke while crying, immediately understood that Mike probably wasn't pretending to joke. "What about Tom?" somebody asked. Mike shook his head. He didn't see anything. He told me not to talk about this and then walked back separately. Not long after that, Tom walked back carrying the headband for Mike. He shook his head and said there was nothing, just the cloth stuck on the light pole. But his face didn't look very comfortable. Mike received the headband and looked at it with surprise. Strange, the cloth is all wet, but it didn't rain earlier. Everyone looked at the soaking wet headband and felt chills. The cloth was not only wet, but also had a strange smell, like the smell of stagnant, rotten water. This caused the employees' party to stop immediately. Before they moved to sleep together in only 2 rooms, no one wanted to sleep alone. But in the middle of the night, Tony woke up because he heard knocking on the door. He got up to look through the window and saw a young man standing outside. It was Law, the young man who had helped them in the forest. "Tony, why are you here at this time?" Law smiled slightly and said, "I came to see if everyone is safe and also to warn about something." "Warn about what?"
"Tomorrow, if anyone wants to go back to that forest again, don't go.
And if you meet that little girl again, absolutely don't respond to anything she asks, Law said with a serious expression. She's not an ordinary person. Tony nodded with understanding. And you, yourself? I'm just someone who comes to help when I see good people in trouble, Law answered softly. I have to go now. Take care of yourself. After that, Law walked away into the darkness. Tony stood watching until he could no longer see him before going back into the room. The next morning, Tony's group came out to sit and eat breakfast with faces that didn't look very good, until Tom said the two brother lambs must have made up stories to trick us for sure. But Mike countered, how could they make up stories? When I went to get the cloth, I still saw Uncle Kim standing with the child. But Tom, who went with him, argued back, don't lie. I went too. Why didn't I see the same as you? While both were arguing, Tony told everyone about Law coming to see him last night, making the atmosphere quiet again. Who exactly is that Law person? One of the women asked. I don't know, but I think he's a good person. He really helped us. This became a story told in the company until today, and everyone still wonders whether Mike really saw it or not, and who exactly Law was who helped them out of the forest. Moreover, Mike had told Tony that the little girl he saw with Uncle Kim, actually, Mike had seen her 3 times altogether. The first time he saw that little girl was at the Riverside community when they stopped to rest and play in the water initially. The second time was at the abandoned community when they were rafting and got stuck on the rocks. And the third time was when he went to get the headband. When thinking back to the old woman's warning that told Mike not to talk to anything random, and Law's warning that said not to respond to anything that little girl asked, Tony immediately knew that everything that happened might not just be coincidence. And importantly, if Law hadn't appeared to help them in their time of crisis, they might not have returned to tell this story to anyone. Many years have passed, Tony still thinks about the events of that night always, and wonders who exactly Law was. Was he an ordinary person with an extraordinarily kind heart? Or was he something supernatural who came to help people when they were in danger? But there's one thing he's certain of. Law, whoever he was someone with a beautiful heart, and he's grateful for the help received that night.